Well, good evening officially to each of you and to our recording tonight. We're so delighted to have you here for our final intersection series. It's been a good one, and I'm excited tonight to dig into this important topic as well. Excited to see folks from a wide range of libraries represented here in the chat and on our registration list. So, as I mentioned, my name is Sam Bowers, consultant for continuing education at the State Library. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie to introduce the topic and her lovely co-presenter as well. Thank you, Bon.
Thank you, Samantha, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. I'm Bonnie McEwen. I'm the consultant with the Northwest District Office. My home base is Sioux City, and my partner in this series and in many other ways at the State Library is Mandy Easter with the State Law Library. So I thank you to Mandy and Sam for wrangling the technical issues in our room and all the registration things that are happening. Good registration numbers again this evening. So I think Sam told me something like 225. Was that? That's close anyway. So we're glad to have you here. Here is where we've been in our three-part series. We began in September by looking at city buildings and city libraries. In October, we looked at library budgets and how they are such a integral part of the city's budget. And tonight, we will conclude our three-part series with looking at library staff as city staff. This webinar really came about because these three topics represent some of the most commonly asked questions that come to us at the State Library: buildings, budgets, and personnel. And we spend a lot of time talking about library board authority. And that's for good reason, because we spend a lot of time talking with library boards, but it's important to remember, and I think this series really was a good reminder of this, that our partners in city government also have important authority too. And in these three areas of buildings, budgets, and personnel, cities do have legal and rightful involvement in decision making. So not only are these topics the ones that generate frequent questions to us at the State Library, they are also topics where it's especially important for the city side of the aisle and the library side of the aisle to be in good communication with each other, to be working with each other in a good spirit of cooperation and collaboration. So I'll have lots to say about city staff, library staff, how they are the same. A little bit about public library standards, as we always do. And just a touch on the city library ordinance that does show our boards with authority over matters of personnel, but within limits. What we really will spend our time on this evening is some of the most frequent questions that come to us regarding library personnel. So we'll touch on all of that. And Mandy, as she has done in the past, has some very good legal resources for you to note. And we also have some good resources that you will enjoy looking at after tonight. Speaking of standards, you'll always find us connecting standards to the topics we offer in our workshops and webinars. So library personnel is no exception to that. There you see on the screen, In Service to Iowa Public Library Standards. That's the current version of our standards document. And it turns out that the entire Chapter 3 is devoted to library personnel. You might find some other HR related standards sprinkled throughout the book, but really Chapter 3 is loaded with standards that speak to library personnel. One of them being that our directors in the majority of cases need to complete the State Library's endorsement program. That's a standard required at a Tier 1 level. Boards need to evaluate their directors. We'll have a bit more to say about that later tonight. That's a Tier 1 standard. Boards need to ensure that there are job descriptions for all staff positions and HR policies in place. Those are also Tier 1 standards. So you can see that personnel is an important foundational aspect of library management and governance. And so we will leave it there at this point. With limited time tonight, we'll leave it there for you to check out Chapter 3 of In Service to Iowa and see how your library does in meeting those HR standards. This is another very good resource that we mention each time. This is the 2021 edition of the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook. Chapter 9 of this publication is all about relationships. It speaks to the board's relationships with the director, the staff, and city government. So this chapter includes the chart you see there on the right-hand side that summarizes board responsibilities and director responsibilities on all of those topics you see in that left-hand column there. Staffing and policies are right at the top. So this is a good summary of what the board is expected to do and what our directors are expected to do in these categories. But we'll see from tonight's discussion that our partners in city government have important responsibilities in these things as well, and important oversight in matters of personnel. Just as we've seen in the previous webinars where we've talked about the city's involvement in the library's building and facilities, the city's involvement in the library's budget, the city does step in to matters of library personnel. This is just a sample language from a sample city library ordinance. I suspect your own local ordinance will read very similarly to this. And Mandy and I wanted to include just a couple of screenshots from the ordinance. Even though library trustees are not paid employees, we know that they are still very important people in the mix. They are very important people. And as you know, our library trustees in Iowa, in the vast majority of our cities and towns, are appointed by mayors, approved by councils to do the work of governing boards. So governing boards have considerable authority over personnel matters. And we'll see that tonight. We'll see that in this arena of personnel, there are really some crucial intersections where the city and the library board have to understand each other. They have to understand each other's roles, and they have to really work together in matters of personnel. This slide, again, just kind of gives you some of the main points in our sample ordinance, which again is probably very similar to your own local ordinance. It does demonstrate the scope of authority that our boards have over personnel. Probably the most important activity and decisions our boards will be involved in is when they have the occasion to hire a new library director. So that authority rests with our library board, and to set the director's compensation along with the rest of the staff. Our library boards can also vote to dismiss the library director, as you can see in point number 5. And then the library boards authorize our library directors, the directors and staff. The directors in turn authorize their staff to help in the overall operations of the library. So we're calling this intersections because we want to talk more about how the city government factors in to some of this, some of these decisions over HR matters. We'll see how all these people intersect. You know, Mandy and I are, I think it's safe to say we are always surprised by how often this question comes our way. The question being, are library employees also city employees? Are they considered that? And our answer tonight and always is a resounding yes. Library employees are indeed city employees for the reasons you see here on the screen. But the frequency of that question must mean that there is some uncertainty out there about whether library staff are in fact city staff. And I suppose some of that stems from the fact that library boards are governing and they have a great deal of decision making. But because this remains a common question, we wanted to start off with this one. Are library employees city employees? Yes. And for these reasons, topping my list is that your staff paychecks probably read from the city of, your staff are on the city's payroll. If there's a city salary scale, we hope to shout that the library employees are included on it. No doubt your library staff are included in the city's workers' compensation insurance. And while point number 4 isn't universally true, it's pretty common to find that our library boards have adopted many of the same holiday closings as the other city offices adopt. And if there are holiday benefits going out to other city workers, those holiday benefits ought to be going out to the library employees as well. Mandy has more to say about this, and she has even more reasons that underscore our answer that this is a decided yes.
Well, public libraries do not exist without their cities. The cities created them. Iowa Code Chapter 392 is entitled City Administrative Agencies. Iowa Code Section 392.5 is entitled Library Board. Therefore, libraries are considered city administrative agencies. Public library employees are city employees because the public library is a city agency. Iowa Code Section 392.1 explains the relationship between cities and their administrative agencies. Public library employee salaries are paid from the city's general fund in the form of an appropriation. That makes public library employees city employees. If the city offers benefits to some city employees but not others, that is a discriminatory practice. An Iowa Attorney General's opinion dated March 18, 1976, stated in the last paragraph, "It is the view of this office that the library board has express power to hire and fire the librarian and other library employees. However, it must be remembered that all such employees are employees of the city of Davenport, and the library board is an agency of the city deriving."
Here's our second personnel issue.
So integral to providing equal employment opportunities is a practice of openly advertising all available positions. While there is no state statute or regulation that explicitly mandates such advertising, the Veterans Preference Law in Iowa Code Section 35C.1 requires cities to post a public notice of the application deadline to fill a public job at least 10 days prior to that deadline. The posting requirement is the same as for posting agendas in that the notice is to be posted in a prominent place which is easily accessible to the public and clearly for that purpose. The fact that a city has advertised for a position in a newspaper or other publication does not fulfill the posting obligation of the statute. While posting is the legal requirement, advertising open positions in local or regional newspapers or on profession-specific websites, such as the State Library's job list, is still the best way to secure a large pool of qualified applicants. The spirit of the Veterans Preference Law ensures that everyone has an equal opportunity to work for the government, that the best candidates have been sought for all public positions, that only the most qualified people work at all levels of government, and that when applicant qualifications are equal in every other way, veterans are the preferred candidates. While a member of the library's current staff may be the obvious frontrunner for an open position, he or she should still submit an application and compete for the job alongside all the other candidates. If the current staff member is selected to fill the position, His or her superiority over the other candidates should be well documented for the record, and the hiring decision should be above reproach. Job advertisements are subject to a few easily met legal guidelines. The Iowa Administrative Code prohibits any employment preference, limitation, or specification based on gender or age. Listings should never specify male or female, nor should they contain terms or phrases expressing an age preference, such as young or high school student or recent college graduate. The hiring process for a library director is different from the hiring process for other library employees. The board hires the director and is responsible for evaluating, disciplining, and terminating the director. The director hires, evaluates, disciplines, and terminates all other library employees without involvement from the board. Hiring a city department head requires the board to follow certain rules so that the process is public and transparent. If the board decides to appoint a subcommittee of trustees to help with the process of hiring a director, the subcommittee must meet in open sessions as long as it is doing deliberative work regarding the board's business. For instance, if the subcommittee is merely sorting through applications to weed out those applicants who do not meet the minimum requirements for the job, that work can likely be done anywhere at any time without noticing the public. However, if the subcommittee will be deliberating the merits of qualified applicants, say narrowing down a pool of 10 competent candidates to 2 or 3 whose applications will be presented to the entire board for final consideration, then the committee is doing the work of the board, which means it must conduct its meetings according to our open meetings laws. Applications for public positions are confidential documents under Iowa Code Section 22.7, subsection 18. So protect applicants' identities by referring to them as candidate A, candidate B, or candidate 2, candidate 3, etc. during this stage of the process in open meetings. Deciding whether or not a subcommittee meeting has to be an open meeting is complicated and often turns on the specific facts of a particular meeting. So feel free to double check with the staff of the Iowa Public Information Board if you have questions.
Here's our next frequently asked HR question, all about interviewing.
Interviews for the position of library director typically fall under open meetings laws. Interviews can only be closed to the public under Iowa Code Section 21.5, which says a governmental body may hold a closed session only by affirmative public vote of either 2/3 of the members of the body or all of the members present at the meeting. A governmental body may hold a closed session only to the extent a closed session is necessary for any of the following reasons. And one of those reasons is to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose appointment, hiring, performance, or discharge is being considered when necessary to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation and that individual requests a closed session. In the application process, each candidate can be asked whether, in the event that he or she is interviewed, an open or closed interview is desired, noting that a closed interview must meet the statutory requirement regarding the individual's reputation. Indicate that the candidate's answer to this question will not affect the board's consideration of the candidate's qualifications. Tell each candidate that if he or she requires a closed interview per law, a formal signed request in writing will be necessary. You can either include a form letter to be signed and returned or ask for the candidate's own letter to be returned with the application. The board must discuss applications in open session when determining which candidates will be contacted for an interview. Once the board has chosen which applicants will be interviewed, each of those candidates should be notified that he or she is a finalist and that the list of finalists may or will, depending upon the particular city's practice, become public. Some candidates may opt to drop out if they feel that their present jobs or working relationships would be compromised or endangered once their applications for different jobs become public. If a candidate agrees to be interviewed, again confirm whether a closed interview is required by law. Interviews should be conducted in standalone sessions, not regular board meetings, in which the interviews are the only business before the board. Situations in which candidates attempt to gain an advantage by sitting in on each other's interviews, in the case of open interviews, can be avoided by not scheduling them back to back. Even if a candidate sits through another candidate's interview, everyone at the interview knows he or she did that, so there's supposedly no advantage to be gained. If an interview is conducted during a closed session in accordance with Iowa Code Section 21.5, be sure the board follows the laws in subsections 2, 3, 4, and 5, especially those pertaining to recording and documenting the closed session.
Well, this is a good source that's very helpful. I've always found it helpful in the hiring process, and I've shared this link a time or two with library boards who have inquired about the interviewing process. It comes to us from the Iowa Workforce Development. It's titled The Successful Interviewing Guide. This is a free download from the Workforce Development website. You have the address there at the bottom of the screen. Now, this is still the 2011 edition of this publication, so it is a bit dated, but I still think it's very useful, and I still think that library boards can glean some really important information from this booklet. If nothing else, sharing legal versus illegal questions to ask in an interview is a very important piece of this interviewing guide. So we wanted to make sure that you were aware of this resource. Here's another frequently asked questions about personnel, and that surrounds HR policies. Who should write those? Who's involved in writing those? Can the library board do its own thing? Should the library board become a part of the city's HR policies? Mandy has good advice on that.
The typical library city ordinance gives wide authority and broad powers to library boards of trustees to manage their city libraries, including the ability to make expenditures and compensate employees. However, library employees are first and foremost city employees. So at a minimum, their pay and benefits must comply with local ordinances and state and federal laws, and their compensation levels must be commensurate with other similarly situated city workers. As city employees, library employees are eligible for all benefits offered to city employees in their same employee classification. Typical classifications are full-time, part-time, temporary, and seasonal, although cities are free to define their own classifications. One city may say that anyone who works 30 hours per week is full-time, and a neighboring city may define full-time as working 40 hours per week. The Iowa League of Cities advises, it is important to carefully define employee classifications and to be consistent in offering benefits. A city does not have the flexibility to offer health coverage to some full-time employees and not to others, nor can it offer different levels of benefits to its full-time employees. The only exception to this is in the case of collective bargaining agreements, which may supersede the employee classifications. For example, a union group of employees may negotiate for a different level of benefits than that of non-union employees. Again, consistency within classes is very important. Some cities agree to pay for both single and family coverage. Others pay for single but not family. Each city must make a determination as to what benefits it wants to offer and be consistent. The Iowa Insurance Division staff says that Iowa Code Sections 505.21 and 509.1 state definitively that the employers must offer their employees access to insurance benefits, and those benefits cannot be offered in a discriminatory manner. Subsection 509.11a states, the employees eligible for insurance under the policy shall be all of the employees of the employer, or all of any class or classes thereof determined by conditions pertaining to their employment. Even though by ordinance the library board has the power to set employee compensation levels, it's quite a leap to say that such power also means that boards have the authority to establish personnel policies for library employees. The problem with the city having different personnel policies for employees in the same class is that such a system is bound to be discriminatory. The Iowa League of Cities General Counsel advises library boards to adopt the same personnel policies under which other city employees work in order to avoid potential litigation. If the city has policies, procedures, or guidelines pertaining to particular personnel issues, the library board is legally bound to follow them unless it can be demonstrated that library employees' circumstances are somehow different from other city employees' circumstances, and the council approves of the different policies. For instance, some library boards insist to their councils that they cannot hire qualified part-time directors unless they also offer health insurance benefits. So even though other city employees must work full-time to receive health insurance benefits, the board asks to pay the additional premium required for a part-time employee's coverage so that they can attract well-qualified candidates. If a library board approves personnel policies that differ from the city's, the league emphasized that this is a city management issue. If the council is comfortable with library employees having different policies than other city employees, then everyone should move on. However, if the council has issues with how the library board is managing library employees or the policies they have implemented, then the council and the library board need to work together to find common ground on policies that can be applied to all city employees regarding benefits, sick leave, vacation, etc., and to agree on a holiday schedule that balances time off with the closure of city facilities. Since this matter has never been adjudicated by the courts, the best guidance at this point comes from the league.
And I'll just make one more point here, Mandy, that you and I have talked about. We've each gotten this question before in those instances where library boards have a separate personnel policy manual from the cities. Sometimes the city, then the city clerk, will send a copy of the city HR policy to the library director and board, asking for them to sign off, asking the library board to sign an acknowledgement page when given a copy of the city's HR handbook. This is pretty common practice. It simply acknowledges receipt of the city's handbook, right? I think the hesitation for our directors and boards to sign that acknowledgement page is that they feel that this is undercutting the library board's authority over matters of personnel, but not really. It really is, as we see it, a simple receipt, acknowledging the receipt of the handbook. It doesn't divest the board of its authority, as will be outlined in your city ordinance, over matters of personnel. In fact, we do this in state government as well. All of us on the state library staff every year are asked to sign a receipt, an acknowledgement receipt that we've received the state's HR handbook. So don't be worried about that practice. It's a common one. Here is another personnel issue that that's always an interesting one and always brings about some questions, and that likely could be, one reason could be because this is a standard at a tier 1 level, and it's all about conducting performance evaluations.
Well, first of all, director evaluation should be conducted during open board meetings, but the law provides a method for closing that specific part of the meeting under certain narrow circumstances. We've already talked about Iowa Code Section 21.5 entitled Closed Session, but it's such an important law that it does bear repeating here that Section 1I allows a meeting to be closed to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose appointment, hiring, performance, or discharge is being considered when necessary to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation, and that individual requests a closed session. The key clauses here are that the director is led to believe the evaluation is going to be bad enough to needlessly and irreparably damage her reputation, and she requests that the board close that portion of the meeting. The request should be in writing ahead of the meeting if possible. The board cannot go into closed session to discuss disciplining or firing the director on its own. The director must request it. Once the board has voted to close the meeting, the director can be asked to leave. He or she doesn't have a right to be present during the closed discussion. Furthermore, the board is prohibited from taking any final action in closed session. All voting must occur in open session. Again, subsection 5 of Iowa Code section 21.5 details the extensive record keeping that must be done during a closed session. Notes must be taken, the entire discussion must be tape recorded, and the notes and tape must be stored in confidence for at least a year, usually in the city's vault. No one, including the director, can access the notes or the tape. Only certain state agencies and the courts may do so after a complaint or suit has been filed. As we also mentioned earlier, the director manages the staff, including regularly evaluating them based on an objective and consistent method approved by the board and the city. The director should not involve the trustees in staff evaluations. There also tends to be confusion about closing meetings to discuss general personnel matters. It is inappropriate to close a meeting to discuss things like director or staff wages, salaries, benefits, working conditions, or even laying off or reassigning staff or eliminating certain positions. These difficult discussions should all be held during open meetings.
And it might be worth asking at City Hall in the same way you might ask if the city has a job application that they would like the library to use when they are going to hire staff. Check with City Hall to see if they have a job evaluation form that they would like you to use as well, or one that can be customized or adapted. And the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook speaks to conducting the director's job performance in Chapter 10. Here is yet another personnel issue, and it has to do with keeping personnel records. Where and for how long?
Neither state nor federal law addresses where performance evaluations should be stored, and neither do the published administrative resources on the Iowa League of Cities website. These decisions depend upon local ordinances, policies, procedures, and practices. A city is within its rights to insist that all city employee personnel files are stored at City Hall. At the state level, copies of state employee records are stored in several places: at the employee's agency, at the employee's department, and at the Human Resources Enterprise in the Department of Administrative Services. From the many horror stories I've heard about documents from employees' files going missing at the library, it's probably a good idea to store duplicate records at City Hall. Iowa Code section 22.7, subsection 11, makes public employees' personnel files confidential, and the only information in them that's public is the employee's name and compensation, the dates the individual was employed, the position or positions held, the individual's educational attainment, previous employers and dates of employment with each, and, if applicable, the fact that the employee was discharged as the result of a final disciplinary action. The library board and the director are the only city officials or employees authorized to hire, fire, and discipline library staff.
All right, and this next one coming up is not so much a question as it is more of a summary about personnel issues. It's a phrase that I've used quite often in my conversation with library boards and directors. And it's this phrase: in terms of personnel, the board can do more, but the city cannot do less. So Mandy has some of that explanation.
The typical Iowa Library City Ordinance says that the trustees have the authority to set the library directors and the employees' compensation levels. Recently, an Iowa mayor consulted with a private law firm to interpret this particular wording in the library's ordinance after the city council refused to honor the trustees' raise in the director's salary. The letter from the law firm to the mayor says, "Dear Mayor, please accept this correspondence in response to your question regarding the decision by the Library Board of Trustees to increase the compensation of the librarian." And then, after citing to relevant portions of the library ordinance and Iowa Code section 392.5, the letter continues. In essence, It is within the library board's sole authority and discretion to set the compensation of the library director. Such a decision is not within the purview of the council, and the position of library director is not under the control or authority of the council. As it pertains to the library itself, the council has the authority to set the budget for the library board. However, it is up to the library board to determine how such funds are spent and to do so without the need or requirement for council approval. I would therefore suggest that the specifics of the library board's decision to increase compensation, including discussions where the library director is referred to by name, not be discussed during a council meeting. Also, as the library director is not a position under the control or supervision of the council, a closed session regarding such discussion would not be appropriate. So that was very strong wording. There is a formal opinion of the Iowa Attorney General dated January 21st, 1988 that responds to questions from the Davis County Attorney pertaining to the Bloomfield City Council's passage of an amendment to the library's ordinance, forcing the library board to comply with the city's personnel policies, rules, regulations, and salary scales. The Attorney General concluded, a restriction on a library board of trustees' authority to set the compensation of library personnel in an ordinance which previously granted exclusive control over expenditures and compensation to the library board would constitute an alteration of the charge of a library board as used in Iowa Code Section 392.5 and would be void absent approval by referendum. Both of these opinions contradict a city council's claim that it can interfere with the library board's authority to set staff compensation levels. Please note, though, that the city council will likely approve any library salary increases in order to formally acknowledge the raises, which signals to the city clerk that certain personnel expenditure records need to be updated. That's okay. The council is not actually giving its permission for the funds to be spent, but rather rubber stamping the library board's decision for the official record. The same way the council approves payment of library bills, even though it has no real authority to disapprove their payment. Employers, including cities and library boards, must also be cognizant of comparable worth issues and take measures to avoid lawsuits over violations of Iowa Code Section 216.6A, which prohibits wage discrimination based on gender. In most cities, library directors are department heads with the education, training, and experience required to supervise other employees, spend a budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and otherwise effectively manage a highly visible city agency accountable to all facets of the municipality's population. They should be paid accordingly and in line with other city employees whose job descriptions and resumes are similar. Recently, in one particular Iowa city, a teenager was hired as a temporary summer employee to mow city property, and his hourly wage was set at 1.5 times the wage being paid to the library director. In some towns, the street sweeper earns more than the library director. Grossly unfair wage disparities create legal liabilities for cities and library boards, making them vulnerable to adverse litigation. Such disparities should be immediately remedied once acknowledged. The good news is that the state library recently got a grant to hire a consulting firm to develop a salary toolkit for library directors, staff, boards, and cities to use when calculating equitable salaries for library personnel. It has been written and reviewed, and the state library plans to publish it early next year, so stay tuned.
Thank you, Mandy. Well, those are the questions and issues that come to us quite often at the State Library. What we'd love to hear from you now in chat is if you have any happy personnel stories to share, any happy success stories. Maybe times when your library staff needs successfully matched up with other city workers. Here's a good question. Does your city have a salary scale? And if so, are your library staff a part of that? Do you know if your library staff are receiving comparable benefits compared to other city workers? How do your HR policies compare and contrast with what's in place for other city workers? So we'll pause here for a minute or two to let you share with us your happy stories. And maybe some of them have come in already through chat, Sam, and they've passed by me.
No, we've had a quiet chat group here for the moment. We may see that tick up here. A couple questions that we can collect. I would love to see those happy stories though too. Um, shall we do one of these questions while we wait for stories?
Well, I've in my experience, those salary scales, which I think are so incredibly helpful and always to the advantage of library staff, if a city has a salary scale and library staff are included on it. Um, I think it's a wonderful practice, but they're pretty few and far between in library land, at least in my experience. I don't bump into those very often. So it's a good thing if you're kind of new to your time on the board and you're not sure if there is such a thing in play at your city hall for other city workers. It's a great question to ask.
We have one person excited about the development of the toolkit. That will be good.
Yes, we are too. That's been a long time in the making, but it'll be a happy New Year's present when we're able to share it out there.
Yes. Um, and kind of to Betsy's question in chat and to Nancy as well. Library director salaries are collected in the big stats book. And so Nancy asked a question about comparing to other libraries of a similar size. That's not, that is a place to get that kind of data. eh, However, we also encourage you to look beyond the library when you're thinking about scoping some of that information. Look to other department heads in your city with similar education and experience, maybe beyond just other library directors who may be fighting their own battles with low wages as well.
Mhm. Library wages tend to be on the low end of wages. So comparing though to libraries of comparable size is a very logical place to start your comparisons. But yeah, I would agree, Sam, and that would be one of the real useful benefits of this toolkit that we're rolling out in the new year. It does encourage comparisons to be made across other city departments with other city workers. And if you're in a kind of a small town where there are not very many other city workers, you could broaden that and look around your county to see if there are county positions that are somewhat, comparable to the work and education requirements and responsibilities of your directors.
Well, shall we tackle a few of these questions? Or you want to roll through the rest of the slides? How you feeling?
We have some resources to share, but
Let's
that
do
won't
that.
take long. So do you what would you like to do? Are there other
Your call.
questions that have come in?
There are a few questions and some good ones, I think. Some that I think you'll find worth answering for sure. So we did have a question. You mentioned the holidays. City or library recently adopted the city's personnel policy. The holidays are the confusing part. There are 2 days we are closed that the city is
Mhm.
not, and they are closed on 2 days that we are not. What would be best practice? Should we change the holidays or have a separate policy just for that item?
What do you think, Mandy? I
That's
think
just
you
a
could. It's a good question, and it does become kind of a hard one to kind of match up because often other city departments aren't open on weekends, right?
right.
And libraries are.
Yeah, that's just a
So,
conversation to be had between the library board and the city, just to say, this is why we want to be open on these days and this is why we want to be closed on these days and see what the city has to say about it and then let the negotiations begin.
mhm.
Absolutely. A question that may involve some of this open closed session and performance evaluation came in early at the session. If there is a complaint that the board gets about the director from a staff member, so staff member issuing a complaint to a board member regarding the performance of the director, should the board be involved, or is that to city HR?
Neither. That's actually addressed in the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook. If a staff member were to approach a board member, the board member would say, I am not the person that you should be complaining to. You should go directly to your director. And, you guys have a conversation. The director manages you, the board does not. And going over the director's head to the city HR, nothing good can come from that.
So try to start resolving it as a staff.
Yeah, just tell the staff person they need to go to the director with their complaint.
And a job posting question, should the job posting have a deadline, or could it say open until filled? Do you have a sense of best practice on that?
Well, nobody likes those. Legally, they're really problematic. And so what you probably should do is set a date. And then if you don't have the number of qualified candidates that you want at that point, you reopen the job. Yes. But yeah, when you do that, it can create a lot of legal issues for people who are applying.
Well, right. And I think it's also troublesome for the library board or the subcommittee who's reviewing the applications. How long do we keep rolling with this? When do we stop? Should we expect more applications to come in? Yeah, so I agree with you, Mandy. I think absolutely in the first job advertisement, set a deadline for applications. And it's another good, to me, that's another good indicator to the applicants themselves about timeliness and punctuality. And it shows that they're interested and serious about the job if their application comes in before the deadline.
Absolutely. So in the event that the board is ready and interested to give a raise to the library director, is that something that would have to have a resolution from the city council be approved? The exact question is this: does the library board have to do a resolution or something to ask the council for a raise for the director?
Well, they don't really ask the council for a raise, but what they do, they need to ask the city how the city wants to be notified that this particular person's salary needs to be changed. So sometimes that does require a resolution by the library board that is then forwarded to the city. Sometimes it's just reported to the city clerk, and the city clerk reports it at the next council meeting. I mean, it's just however that city wants to have that kind of thing done.
Absolutely. Then there's a couple more questions here. I may have us run through these resources, Bonnie, and there's a couple that are a little more specific. If we have time, maybe we can address them. Otherwise, if I haven't answered your question, I do invite you to get a hold of either any one of us. Probably if you're looking for subject matter expertise, Bonnie or Mandy, and we can certainly help you out as well. But we have talked off and on tonight about these library law FAQs, and this really is just an outstanding resource. Bonnie has the link to the full resource on the slide. I put it into chat as well, where you can search through by subject, by content area, and certainly all three of the intersections topics that we've touched on. Buildings, our very first session back in September. And then we did budgets last year, and even now tonight, we've been talking about personnel issues. Certainly a lot there in the FAQs, and we encourage you to spend some time reading through those as well. We've mentioned our partners at the Iowa League of Cities a fair bit here, and I know we have city staff on the call with us tonight, and so we hope you are taking advantage of the many resources from the League. They're just an excellent partner in this, and their publication highlighted there on the, I think, right-hand side of your screen, Cityscape, is their monthly magazine. You can get it delivered digitally right to your inbox. Scroll through it. Certainly going to have a lot of important information on city budgets in particular, but lots of life in city world. And then we also have to tote our own Monday morning eye opener, edited by Ms. McEwen of Intersections fame here, who works so diligently on that resource for the State Library every week. So there you're going to stay up to date on continuing education opportunities, of course, but also other happenings in library land around the state, important deadlines, and library holidays to celebrate, things like library card sign up month and this type of thing. So Bonnie does a great job of keeping us well informed through the eye opener. So do make sure you're signed up for both of those publications. Speaking of continuing education, one of my favorite events of the year, it's also one of our first big CE events of the year, is coming up in not quite next month, but as of tomorrow, I guess it will be next month. In January, we are doing the ILOC conference. It's Iowa Libraries Online, and there is a special session in the evening just for boards that will begin at 6 p.m. that night. And we will actually be kind of revisiting this topic a little bit. Our theme for the conference is Libraries Are Forever, and we're going to be talking about some best practices related to human resources and your library board. So I think it could be a great session to sit in on, one where we may have some of these questions rehashed by actually a presenter from the League of Cities. So that will be exciting to see. Lisa England will be presenting for us. Excuse me. And then we've mentioned it a couple times now, but we will be releasing probably in the first quarter of next year this public library compensation toolkit. And I think this will just be a really excellent resource for boards and directors who are beginning to have some of these difficult conversations about pay with their cities, recognizing why is that street sweeper making more than our library director? Is that really fair, equitable? And so how you can begin to have those conversations. We recognize that there is a lot going on in city budget land right now, but it's still really important to make sure that your people are paid fairly for a variety of reasons. And our last slide of resources. These are just some really helpful links. Obviously, Mandy has mentioned a number of different legislative codes that are of interest to us in this discussion, I'll say, and you can search for any of those by number and read the full text there. Department of Management, also our counterpart here from the State Library, a nice state resource for you. League of Cities, obviously, we've mentioned several times, and our own trustee handbook. If you don't have the trustee handbook, can I make a play on words? Okay, yes. Bonnie says I can. Handbook handy. I would encourage you to get that bookmarked. It's a great resource for you in this tricky topic of HR and so many other areas as well. Workforce development, we mentioned their interviewing guide, so do look that up in your next hiring effort, but they have lots of other stuff going on. And our standards, of course, as Bonnie mentioned, just chock full of information related to hiring and best practices for directors and boards. So we're moving on. We got some last questions here. Okay. For the group. So what do you guys think? What are some of your actions coming out of tonight? Certainly begin to compare some policies, make sure things are aligned. Can look at those applications and job evaluations, like a nice, easy, low-hanging fruit to make sure you're being consistent with what the rest of your city is doing. Spend some time with the resources here. Keep an eye out for that compensation toolkit.
Yes, and Sam, we do hope that we get the same kind of registration numbers for our ILOC conference, especially the evening program for boards, as we have enjoyed for this Intersections series. We've been just really so pleased with the registrations for this fall series.
Yes,
so thanks to all of you.
It really has been great to see so many people getting involved in these tricky topics, for sure. And yes, save the date for ILOC. Let me put the link to the ILOC website in the chat. You can also just search for this on the State Library's website. If you're viewing the recording, it should be pretty easy to find, but you'll find more information about ILOC on the website as well. So fun times ahead.
So for those of you having watch parties, maybe you can see some of these questions here, some of these suggestions as things to take back to your next board meeting and discuss some of these things about HR. We ended part 3 of our 3-part series with personnel, but we feel that the greatest asset that our libraries have are the library staff. So we hope these will be some good conversation starters when your boards meet. If you take December off, understood, but if you meet again in the new year, maybe these will be some good conversation starters for you.
Absolutely. One of the questions we did have was kind of negotiating some of those conversations within the city. And we've said throughout this series that just good communication is extremely important both ways. And it's a lot of hard work to build those relationships. But we are so thankful for our partners in city government in this. I like what Mandy said at the beginning about, libraries existing because of their cities. And so it's kind of easy to overlook that fact, but certainly an important one.
And we know that this was a short time together. These were only 1-hour webinars. We could talk about this stuff all day long. So no doubt we have probably not answered every question that's come to you or every if there are any questions that occur to you or come up at your board meetings in the months ahead, please remember us at the State Library. We're always happy to talk with you.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. And I do know there are a couple of questions we did not get to. I would encourage you to reach out.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this intersection series. We really hope you've been informed by it. Buildings, budgets, and personnel are 3 pretty important areas where cities and their libraries have to meet in the middle and find good compromise. So we hope that holds true for you. And thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mandy, ever so much, and to all of you for joining us each and every time for the Intersection series. Thanks for doing that, and have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, Bon. Thank you, Mandy.